All right, we'll pick it up. See, this is the part about editing, right? This never happened. Last part that cut off on was when you were about to say it's difficult to articulate.
I didn't say it like that.
Wow.
Welcome, animation fans, to our iAnimate podcast. We are at episode 15 now. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and joining me tonight is Rick Arroyo. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing awesome. How you doing, Larry?
I'm doing fantastic, bud. Doing really well. We've got some cool news and some great guests tonight. We've got Cameron Fielding, who's currently working over at Valve, who's worked over at DreamWorks beforehand. And so I think we're going to have a nice little conversation with him in regards to his work with feature and video games. And we also have David Hubert, who's going to be joining us as well, who's got a very similar background in regards to working in feature and now over at games, over at Eidos. So I think this is going to be a really cool interview with these guys.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And they're both fantastic guys.
One other thing you mentioned, and maybe we'll get to talk with David a little bit more tonight when we do our interview with him, but just quickly, new games workshop. You want to tell us just briefly about that?
Oh yeah, Dave and I have been working on this workshop, which is focused on creatures and monsters and like flying beasts. I'm going to let Dave talk a little bit more about it because this podcast we're going to do is going to be phenomenal. So yeah, it's going to be an awesome workshop.
Very cool. All right, well, let's bring those guys on. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Yeah, no worries. It's a pleasure, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
Well, we're going to go through some introductions here. Cameron, let's start with you.
Hey guys, I'm Cameron Fielding. I'm currently an animator at Valve Software in Bellevue. Did feature animation for a while, did game animation, talking to iAnimate. Good stuff, good times.
Awesome. David, why don't you give a quick intro for you? I know we've had you on a podcast before, but in case someone's catching this one for the first time.
Yeah, I'm currently animation and cinematic director at the Eidos Montreal. I worked at DreamWorks for a few years. My last production there was on the Croods, so some experience in gaming and feature animation as well. And I'm with Rick, which is my partner in crime for iAnimate Games. So we're kind of managing this stuff on the side as well.
This should be a really good podcast for us then, because particularly with you guys kind of bridging the gap between both feature and games. So I think it'll be cool to touch on a lot of that stuff. And then we got my buddy Rick Arroyo here. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. As I like how everyone calls me the partner in crime. So I'm like, I guess some like mobster, animation mobster or something. But I love it. So, let me just pull out the gold chain for you guys just to make it official.
Yeah.
Oh, there he goes.
Oh, you have the bling bling out. Right.
Cameron, how did you get into animation in the first place?
Oh man, I don't know. I just kind of stumbled on it, really. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I was never kind of crazy into cartoons or comics or anything like that, surprisingly enough. I always liked, E.T. and Indiana Jones and aliens and that kind of stuff and creatures and monsters. And I guess for me, it was just kind of like the spectacle of the screen that I really liked and animation and movement and that kind of thing. But I didn't really know when I was young what I was looking at. I guess the way I got into animation, I did a degree, believe it or not, in graphic design. Seeing as it was a bunch of years ago now, they kind of didn't have, the specific kind of animation courses that they have these days. And surprisingly enough, we were allowed to kind of specialize in animation for the final year of that degree. And I did a short film and stuff like that. And it did pretty well. And I was able to kind of get a job off the back of the film and in games. So I was kind of lucky, I just kind of fell out of college straight into a games job, and it was just a good start for me and turned out good.
Where was that at?
It was a small little developer called Warthog Games. It was in Manchester in the UK. And I started on just a super small little game. It was kind of it wasn't a movie tie-in, but it was, like an IP tie-in for Animaniacs. It was cool. It was like super cartoony and, cyclic game animation. It was like the perfect thing to learn. It was great. It was really good fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I think you're probably most well known for is your Turok show reel. I remember seeing that sometime back before I even actually met you at CTN. And that thing is killer. I love just the body mechanics on that thing alone is just amazing. Now, how long before you got into that gig?
Yeah, it was a while. I mean, we started development on Turok in maybe kind of mid 2005, early 2006.
How long had you been animating before that?
About 5 years, four or
Okay.
5, something like that. So yeah, I mean, not too soon. It took a while to kind of get the opportunity more than anything to do that kind of stuff, because that's what in the back of my mind, what I was kind of always wanting to do up until that point was to do monsters and like dinosaurs specifically, man. Big Jurassic Park fanboy and all that stuff. Like I always wanted to have a go at doing that stuff.
Now, how'd you learn? How'd you get that solid on your body mechanics? Was there anything that you kind of particularly worked on or practiced with? Or I remember listening to something from Richard Lico one time, and he was just talking about studying
Studying
motion.
mocap.
Yeah, mocap.
Yeah,
And that just
yeah.
helped his body mechanics. What about you?
Yeah, I wish I'd had that opportunity. The same as it's funny actually. I'm doing right now at Valve. I'm doing some mocap stuff, and just kind of with hindsight, listening to what Rick was saying about that before, it's so good for that stuff. Looking at the motion that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and I don't know, it's crazy useful as a learning tool in that way. But I don't know, for the Turok stuff, it was just it's difficult to articulate, because I do feel like when I was doing the Turok stuff, I didn't really know what my workflow was, other than just to kind of stumble through the work after having a kind of a clear idea of what I wanted to do in my mind, and just shooting for that in my mind, and just as I worked through the shot and allowed it to develop, my vision for it would change as well. But I mean, it's not really much use to people listening. I guess ultimately it was a layered approach to animation, and it was just figuring out the driving forces, whether it was the head of a dinosaur, or like the head and the chest of the kind of lizardy creature, and just getting the timing and the rhythm and the staging right on those main bits where I felt people would be looking, and then just layering through it. Like for a quadruped, do the head, neck, chest, and the front legs first, and get all that feeling really good, and then kind of bolt on the back legs after, and bolt on the tail and the wings or whatever after that.
Is those going to be the overlapping actions or the?
Some of that, Larry, yeah, but also because if you're doing particularly a quadruped, it's just too much. It's too much to think about. If you're gonna go through and try and put keyframes, that's a great thing to do. But generally, if you've got a shot where something's climbing over something or doing whatever, and there's a lot of locomotion, trying to preemptively figure out all the foot plants and everything is not only is it difficult, but it might stifle the sense of it too. It's easier to go through and just concentrate on one thing at a time and get that to feel nice, and then layer things, and you generally get a better result. Like I say that when I did the Turok stuff, my workflow was kind of in flux. It was difficult for me to nail down exactly how I worked, but I think I would still, having learned different ways of animating since then, I would still do it the same way, because there's a result that you get from that kind of workflow that's kind of interesting and lends itself really well to that kind of movement.
Yeah, it felt very, what's the word I'm looking for? Energetic. It felt like there was a lot of movement in regards to or chaotic movement, and I like that about that shot.
Maybe cheers. I mean, maybe what that is just a product of kind of only thinking about one thing at a time. If I'd sat down and was like, okay, I'm going to think about every little thing on how this little foot moves, and then how the back hip moves and everything, it wouldn't look like that. You know what I mean? It comes from just trying to simplify everything by just thinking about what's most important at that particular point in time. And then at the end of it, you just get this huge mashup, and that kind of energy is what comes from that. And that's one of the good things about working that way for that kind of stuff.
Very cool. And I would definitely want to talk into some more about creatures, because I know, David, you had hit some creatures with Croods, right?
Yeah, actually, I had the opportunity when I started to work on the Croods. It was Fred Nielsen, a good friend of mine, who was the creature supervisor on the Croods. And a good friend of mine as well. And when I got there, I got the opportunity to do some animation tests with some of the creature. It was in pre-production. And although I never really had any experience with creature animation, I think I've been able to, it kind of clicked very rapidly with the creature that I had to work with. And at some point, Fred had to do and work on DreamWorks' new animation software, because he's most probably the most technical animator that we had out there. And when he left, I had the opportunity to take his place and as a character lead for all the creatures. It was a really, really big challenge, but it was very interesting at the same time, because I don't know how many we had, but we had at least 20 different creatures on the crew, and some of them will appear for the entire movie. Some of those will just be there for 1 or 2 shots. So there was a crazy amount of kind of pre-production to do with all those creatures. And sometimes, you would have like 1 week to animate a creature that you would not see for the rest of the movie. So literally the first day was to figure out what is the backstory of this creature, what is going to make it interesting, then just do a few tests real quick, and then animate the shot, make it interesting, entertaining as well, and moving forward. And a lot of time our training is really to do character animation, and then you get to creature and you're like, okay, well, I still have all of this baggage I have with me as an animator. Is going to obviously help me to animate those creatures, but there's a lot of things that I didn't figure out so far, and that's why I think it's really interesting what Cameron was saying. A lot of time, this is when the layering technique of animation comes very handy, because it's I run into exactly the same problem. At first, I really tried to go pose to pose and figure out exactly what was going on, but it seems that, at least for me, there has been a lot of happy accident as I was animating those creatures, and you thought that just appear in front of me. I was like, oh, if I just deal with the energy of the creature first, as just with the body, and then okay, I'm going to make sure that the front leg are working correctly, and is this creature is really going to lead with the head, or is it going to drag a little bit, and all of that stuff. Sometimes if you're trying to overthink, your brain is just overeating with the amount of information that you have to, especially when you have 4 legs and wings and a tail and all of that stuff. So I kind of use a little bit. It was a little bit of pose to pose, just for my blocking, to make sure that James Baxter, which was the animation director, and Chris Sanders were happy with the the very early result of what I was trying to tell the audience with that creature. But very rapidly I was jumping in layering, just to be able to rapidly move and have this very organic and dynamic feeling for most of those creatures. Yeah.
Dave's just got me super interested now. So Dave, when you when you were showing this stuff to James and to Chris and everything, and you're going through and you're blocking basically.
Yeah.
You're seeing this benefit of working in this nice layered way where you get these kind of cool happy accidents and stuff like that. Did you find that it was a good kind of workflow for you to show these keys to James and Chris? And then did you find that they changed a lot, as you kind of worked through and pushed the shot towards final? Or were you in that, you must have somewhat been in that situation where you're like, okay, I've shown these keys, I've spent kind of a decent amount of time on these keys, I want to try and hit them as goalposts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, the big advantage to really work on those goalposts and work in blocking just in step blocking, that you're able to just block 4, 5, 6 poses in there. It kind of forces you to be able to sell an idea just with one image, and this is still very powerful to be able to hit those specific moments. It helps you to kind of focus on what is important, what is the timing of the shot that you're trying to achieve, and it's something that you can do pretty rapidly. And supervisors, directors, and most of the time prefer to see something really early on rather than see something that is almost final, and then they're like, okay, they're not. They feel that if they give comments now, it's almost like they're totally breaking your animation compared to just having a few poses, and they're like, oh, it's amazing, but I think you could do this and this, and they feel much more creative as they're giving you their comments. But when this blocking would be approved, I might put a little more posing in there, maybe some breakdown posing and whatnot. But as soon as I was going in layering, it's almost like I was forgetting those poses. Okay. Most of the time, I would say maybe 80% of those poses would remain there, but sometimes they would be a little bit different because just of the momentum of how the creature arrives there or how it jumps to the. So it's almost like a very good guideline to work with, and then not it doesn't matter if I was always hitting those specific pose at this specific moment, because I knew that 80% was close enough for what I was trying to achieve. But it was definitely for me a mix of both techniques. And although in character animation I would be much more organized, for creature animation, and maybe it was because there was so many different creatures, and I'm not an expert at how snakes are moving, how birds are moving, how dinosaurs are moving, and all of that. A lot has to be figured out, and a lot as well is not. It wasn't like I was planning everything. A lot of time I was just surprised by, this is actually pretty interesting, and I was kind of feeding off this thing that I kind of planned a little bit, but not really, and then I was like, that's really interesting, and then I was just going in a very, very intuitive way at the end of the day. So, and I think a lot of time, and this is something I felt was very, creature animation for me was much more forgiving than character animation, because character animation, we have people around us, we know exactly how the face should be moving, the lip sync, the weight shift, and all of that. Creature animation, especially on Croods, it wasn't really, okay, this is a giraffe, this is an elephant, this is a dog. No, those were creature, invented creature. The first creature I did my test with was actually a turkey fish. So it's a mix of a prehistoric turkey with a fish, but it actually looked like a giant tyrannosaur or something like that. So those kind of creatures are much more forgiving. People won't be, this is not exactly how a turkey fish would be moving. I mean, that doesn't exist. I'm going to do something that looks appealing and entertaining, and people will be satisfied. So that was kind of, and it went really well with the very naive approach to animation for those creatures.
Yeah, wow, man.
Now, for both of you guys here, on a shot like that with creatures, particularly something like that, for even both of you guys, with dinosaurs or creatures that are made up in that regards, how do you approach your workflow with that? Do you do reference as far as other animals that might be similar to that, or is this just strictly off of imagination and now trying to make sure you're getting the right weight and balance for this character?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of that. If you're doing a dinosaur, if you're doing a T-Rex or whatever, you might want to, it's always good to look at what's been done before and try and see what was successful about those things, as well as looking at realistic stuff. So, before I started doing any dinosaur stuff, I looked at Jurassic Park, I looked at some of the good shots in there, and there are some brilliantly animated shots in that film. They're so well done, and it was just interesting because that was the first time it was done in that way, into that fashion, and I believe to that degree of success. So it's always good to look at what's been done before, if there's something similar, and see what was good, what worked, what didn't work about it, and try and take what you can about what was good. And then obviously, as much as you can, just spend a bit of time just going on YouTube or whatever things you have to look at for creatures. And it's not even like you would need to get a creature that kind of is of a similar body type or anything. It's just kind of getting a feel for animals and movement, and it's more about behavior as well. Sometimes, you might, there's no reason why, if you're doing, I don't know, Dave's turkey fish monster or whatever, that you don't necessarily need to look at fish and turkeys. I mean, you're going to do that, but you'd also, looking at monkeys and I don't know, all kinds of animals are going to give you ideas and give you little ideas about how to do it. But specifically to one shot, I think it's more a case of just getting a feel for it and then just like diving in and having fun. I think there's two kinds of creatures, right? You've got the super ultra hard shots, which I was going to say luckily, but maybe not. I haven't had the opportunity to work on I can imagine, a super realistic lion shot or something like that would be so difficult to do. And yet, when you have a unique creature, what you're trying to do is show the audience, especially with stuff like Dave was doing, new creature designs. You're trying to show them something that they haven't experienced before. So you've got this beautiful blank canvas, and you're just trying to get a feeling of. You're trying to evaluate what if I was in the theater watching this and in the movie with my buddy or whatever, what what would I want to experience, and what would I want this thing to move like? And it's that instinct that you need to nurture, because that's what you'll do well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that Cameron, you mentioned Jurassic Park a few times, because I know that personally for me, if it wasn't for Jurassic Park and Toy Story, I would most probably not be in 3D animation. Right now, it seems that the work that I've done under Croods was the perfect mix between those two. You know, Jurassic Park being very kind of realistic in the animation style, and Toy Story being much more cartoony. For me, our approach, if each of the creature, my first question was always, how do I make this creature unique? And this is very it is just for Croods, because like Cameron said, if you have to animate a lion, well, you might make a lot of research on how lions are moving. But since those were all new creatures that didn't really exist, my first question was, what makes them unique? So I would ask myself, okay, I have a turkey fish, which was the first creature I worked on. So what is the background of this creature? Okay, it was most probably a fish before, and he's on the verge of becoming a turkey, but he's not totally there. So he has a tail and still has turkey legs. So, okay, he's going to swim. He's very agile at swimming. So I did something. He was swimming and getting out of the water, because for me, it was kind of representing where that specific species was at that moment. So, okay, he's in the water, he's getting out, but as he's getting out, since he's still more agile in the water, as he was getting out, he was kind of stumbling, and that was right away giving a very kind of clown feeling, very funny feeling to it, just slipping around in this super massive and big creature, but is, has a very hard time to walk on land, and at the same time, which is a very mean predator. So you had this contrast between being very clumsy but still being a scary predator, having a tail and using your legs. So that was a little bit my approach. So as soon as I was establishing, okay, this creature, this is what is going to make it unique. So this, and this. And then I would go and dive into, YouTube, BBC Motion Gallery, and find as much locomotion material as I could. And exactly like Cameron mentioned, not only fish and turkey, but all kind of creatures. And the most important thing that you said, Cameron, and it's right, it's the behaviors of creature. When a dog is wet, he will move his body in one certain way, which is very specific to dogs, how to get the water out of them. When, I don't know, cat are cleaning themselves, there's a very specific way that only cats do it this way. And once you begin to mix, you take one behavior from one animal and you put it in another animal, and this is when you have some very funny situation. And you always want to entertain the audience as well. So what is the creature I'm working with? What are those behaviors? Do we want to make them funny or scary and all of that? And then after that, make sure that I had enough knowledge of anatomy and locomotion as well, with as much reference as I can. And that was really my starting point. And then I was going into blocking a few poses and layering and onto the final product. So that was a little bit my own workflow that I kind of figure out on the Croods. I think for the specific creatures on Croods, it was pretty successful.
So you would just start blocking out some poses that you had in your mind. Would you thumbnail anything out, or you just, hey, these are some of the thoughts I have in my mind and how this thing would move, or the poses that would be to be there, and just kind of start roughly blocking those out?
Yeah, my drawing skills are really limited, so I would might very rapidly thumbnail some stuff, but then I would get depressed and go right away into the 3D software instead. And again, all of my posing was very influenced by locomotion itself. Where my creature is coming from and where is it going.
Yeah.
What is the personality that I want to achieve? So does he look proud? Does he look, ashamed, or all of that? So pretty much the same thing we would do with a character, and always some pose that represent the creature itself and the moment and what I want to sell to the audience. And the timing a little bit, and the staging, because staging is always really important, especially when you have a lot of motion with creatures. Where do you want the audience to look at? There's a way to do some posing that would guide the eyes there. and you will do one motion because you know that you want the eyes of the audience to go in the other way and look at the other creature. So this is all stuff. So the personality, the dynamic of the posing, and the staging as well. This is pretty much what I had in mind when I was doing the posing, then get this approved and move in layering to have this very visceral and entertaining motion on top of that.
The reason I guess I'm asking that too is because, you know, we've had Jacob Garner and Ben Willis in on a podcast in regards to Rise of the Guardians and talking about how heavy references played a role on that film. And I love reference. I love how we're able to use it. But one of the things that you guys are kind of mentioning in regards to creatures, at least specifically, is a portion of animation that I really like that I think you can kind of tend to miss when you use so much reference. And it's like you're saying there, those happy accents, that ability to be able to just kind of jump into the 3D application, start making some poses, and let that kind of momentum drive you in regards to your animation, where it feels a little bit more organic sometimes in that regards. Do you guys feel that that's the case sometimes with this approach?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the show that you're on. Because for Jacob and Ben, for instance, they were on Guardian, which still has a pretty realistic look, and they wanted to be very accurate with the acting and stuff. So it kind of makes sense to really rely heavily on reference. On a show on Croods, which was a little bit the same thing as Kung Fu Panda as well. You have your reference, and for me personally, I would look at them and really analyze how is the locomotion working and why it's working well, and then would just absorb this information. And when I had it in my mind, I would just go and animate. And then if at some point at the end, close to the refinement of my shot, there's some specific part that I was like, I don't know, it feels that it's a little off, I might go back to my reference and go frame by frame to understand exactly what is missing there. And then, oh, okay, I understand. Now I put a reference on the side and I just add this new micro knowledge on my shot, and then I would be happy. So it was not exactly the same process as Ben and Jacob were mentioning. But I'm really interested to know about, Cameron, your shot you did for Turok, how much video reference you had in that. And I was especially amazed at the very accurate and entertaining relation between the warrior and the dinosaur itself. And obviously you didn't have any, not any reference, but you didn't have a dinosaur with you to be able to achieve that. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, coming back to what you were saying, Larry, I love reference. I think that there's no better thing you can do than research what it is you're trying to do, right? The worst thing you can do is just assume that you know how to do something. That you want to do some kind of research and get an understanding of what you're trying to do, even if you think you know how to do it. But and so, I mean, reference for me was something that I started doing because I didn't know how to do it any other way. Like particularly when I first was at DreamWorks, and I'm getting cast shots where characters got to act to certain beats and certain performances that are required for the shot. And to be honest with you, it's not something that I could just make up in my mind like was much easier with the creature stuff. And it was the same with the creature stuff. I mean, I shot reference for myself interacting with this kind of imaginary dinosaur. and the way I did that is I'd think in my mind, right, I know what I want roughly the staging to be, what the camera's gonna do, and I know what the beats of the shot are going to be, like the plot of the shot was going to happen, and I would literally just get a cushion or whatever, film myself doing it. And I remember doing it in kind of this panicky kind of way. Like I get up in the morning and I'd say to my wife, I've got to shoot some reference, quickly, and I'd set up the webcam and I'd do it in the lounge, and I'd get a couple of takes. And there was something nice about that because I kind of had to do it fast. I just had to make a decision quickly and just kind of get into it and just make a choice. I found that doing reference for shots at DreamWorks, sometimes the process was really like, I was always happy at the end when I had my reference, but sometimes I found the process really quite tiring because I'd spend a lot of time doing it because basically what I'm doing in that time is figuring out what I'm doing in shot. I mean, I almost wouldn't do any planning for a shot other than just launching it and seeing what's needed in the shot technically and story wise, and then I'd kind of plan very loosely what the staging of the shot is, so where characters need to be and where they need to go, and then outside of that, I would just stick the camera on and I would just start mouthing the shot and doing it and seeing what happens. You know, and I'd do that for half an hour or like 40 minutes, and then I'd go through and I'd find takes and chop stuff together. But yeah, and the Turok stuff was, the human stuff was totally referenced, and then it was a case of getting the human to about 70%, and then I would literally just kind of bolt on the dinosaur. I would kind of see, you know, the bits of the dinosaur that are leading the motion and that are interacting the most with the human, and I'd get those pretty far, and then like I said before, I just kind of bolt on the back legs, bolt on the tails. Yeah, reference is great because it just, it's not about you know, reference isn't about kind of showing you how to do something right. It's about giving you an idea that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of, and that's what's critical with animation, because you want to give people, you know, a new experience that they can also empathize with, and you're way more likely to do that if you just kind of don't be afraid to look stupid if someone busts in on you whilst you're recording some reference or something.
Thrashing around a pillow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I got at DreamWorks, I remember that I wasn't really using video reference, and I think it was pretty much at the time at the end of Kung Fu Panda that some animators at DreamWorks started to use more and more video reference. And I remember seeing a few shots, including some work that Cameron did on How to Train Your Dragon with Stoic, and some shot that Dave Pate did on Shrek, and Pierre Perifel and Olivier Stafilas as well, just to name a few animators. And you could really see the difference. You know, some shots were from other animators that were not using reference. They were really good and really entertaining, but then you would see the same quality of animators but using a reference. They were like, whoa, the acting is so accurate. There's a little something that I connect with a little more than any other animation. And at the time, I remember going frame by frame to one of Cameron's animation, and I was about to, you know, just surrender, just retire, and like, okay, I'll never be able to. My brain is not, you know, strong enough to come out with this idea. And then that's when someone told me, oh yeah, he's amazing, but he's using reference. I was like, right, and it kind of clicked at some point. And at first, you just have to pass you kind of have the feeling that, yeah, but isn't using reference kind of cheating a little bit? And then you very rapidly realize that, you know, the audience really doesn't care if you used a reference or not. They're just going to see the end result. Are they entertained? Are you really touching the audience? So very rapidly, I started to use more and more reference as well. And like Cameron said, first of all, it's a lot of time you just cannot plan everything. You just try a few things, you act it out in front of the camera. If you have a shot with two characters, you just bring one of your animation bodies and you start to feed off from each other's kind of improvisation, and then the magic just appears in the front of the lens. And then you kind of synthesize this as, oh, this is working really well. I can match this with this, and you kind of create a great performance, because, you know, we're not all trained actors, so sometimes we need to, oh, I did a great little piece of performance here and another one here, and we kind of Frankenstein some kind of performance. And even some animators would do those little editing of all those performance and redo a performance that is hitting all those specific mark. I know that another good friend of mine, Laura, was doing that on Puss in Boots, and it was very, very successful as a technique for having great results. So, and honestly, when you add a video reference to your toolkit of animators, you don't go back. Then it's a matter of using in a clever way, because if you use it too much, we could argue that, well, why not just using motion capture? That will be much more effective. But if you're able to capture the essence of a reference and then apply graphic rules and timing on top of that, you can really achieve great entertainment that the audience is going to connect with, and it's going to take you much less time than if you're really trying to figure out all of this on your own as well. So yeah, definitely a tool to keep for sure.
Yeah, we had a podcast with Jason Ryan and Mike Walling. We're talking about reference and the use of it. And one of the things I love watching Jason in our weekly demos that he does is how he uses reference. Because there's been times where I've shown him my shots and he'll talk about, okay, well, let's not do this here. And I'm like, but it was in my reference. And he's like, yeah, I know, but we're trying to make it more entertaining than just your reference. But there's things that he'll look at the reference and use it, even if it's just a starting off point or a portion of his reference that he'll use. So he's not using it for a one-to-one, but it's like you're saying there, he uses them for ideas or little sparks that he sees in his reference there. And that's where he's getting that entertainment value there. So I definitely think it's a nice balance, I guess. I like the idea of using reference, but I also like some of the stuff you guys are talking about where it's using it as a springboard to now start trying to animate more and be creative in that regards. So.
Yeah. And I would say that especially for creatures, we're talking about behaviors before, there are some behaviors that I had no idea that were actually happening in animals, and I could feed from those inspiration, and there's no way I could have come up with those.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Cameron, let's kind of transition a little bit to Madagascar 3, because I know you worked on that one as well. How was your workflow different from a movie like that, where it's very cartoony and stylized?
You mean how is it different to creature stuff? Is that what you...
Just in general, how would you approach a shot like that? Is it reference heavy as well in those shots?
Well, it always depends on the shot. I mean, it's that stupid thing that animators say, it always depends on the shot, but it really does. But I would say that, 80% of the work that I did on that show, I would start with reference. And like I said before, it's mostly because that's where I figure out the idea of what I'm actually going to do. And, as well as use it as a springboard to animate from. But it just depends. Like I did one shot with which is kind of near the start of the movie, and there's one of the monkey guys, Mason, and he's kind of screams through this window, and he jumps back into a room, and he swings around on a chandelier, and he crashes into a mirror, and then the other monkey, I forget his name, he puts like lipstick on his lips. And that was kind of a nice little hybrid, because the monkey screaming and stuff, I kind of shoot a bit of reference to myself doing that. and then I even shot a reference to myself, like with a little chapstick, putting lipstick on. But then there was a section in the middle that I had to make up. How does a monkey turn around, jump on a chair, on a chandelier, swing around? And the way that I did that is I kind of, and it's an interesting kind of technique that I'd used a couple of times up until then, but I'm looking for this nice opportunity to do it again, and I do it when I can do it. But I just animated a cube. So I had, a cube that was kind of roughly the size of the monkey standing in the mirror, in the window. And I would kind of squash it down and then extend it and squash it and then move it up onto the chandelier, spin it round, and then kind of do the timing. So what I was doing was kind of thinking, all right, it's pretty complicated what's got to happen here. So how can I make this monkey with all these limbs and all this stuff the simplest thing it can be? How can I make it into a bouncing ball? And the cube thing was great because I could animate the cube, get the feeling of the timing, which was the core of what the audience would feel, just the timing of that and the comedic timing of it and the sense of weight. And I could show that to people and say, does this feel right? Does it feel like it's spin around this many times? And would he do this many flips when he comes off before he crashes into the mirror and that kind of stuff? And then spatially, when I came to animate the actual monkey, I had a cube in the scene, and I would literally just go through, like, I say maybe 4 frames, set a key, go through the next 4 frames. Okay, here's the cube. Set my pose to work with the rough alignment of the cube, and then it was like this beautiful map that I built for myself to go through the shot. So, I tend to do that now. I mean, any time where I've got a complex emotion that I want to condense into something simple, I'll just animate a cube and just use it as a map for my timing. But coming back to your original question, Mad 3 was a lot of, it was important for us to sell the acting in the shots. That was what what was important for the directors, and it was important for the animators to make sure that we were telling the story. Creature stuff it is really story dependent, but as soon as you have a character that needs to speak, deliver dialogue and do it in a certain way, it quickly becomes a lot more complicated, and it becomes easier for you to go off course faster. So, I mean, the way that I would do that is I would shoot reference, and I would actually show reference before I even put anything in the software, in 3D software. And I did that because, I could do a number of takes, say maybe pull out 3 or 4 takes of a shot of myself that I felt was working all right in the edit. And then take that to dailies and show that in dailies. And, there were times where I had to do the shot of Gia dancing in this little kind of room, and she's kind of doing this super, effeminate dance. And she's kind of imagining her own fantasy. She wants to be this like trapeze artist, and she's in this little moment with herself, And I had to go to dailies, and it was up on the big screen and everything. But you kind of reach this threshold, like the first couple of times you show reference, it's embarrassing, but then you don't care, because you come out of there with a really clear idea of whether your idea whether it worked or not. And it's a really easy, efficient way for you to say, this is exactly what I'm thinking of doing, And then I would just kind of break it down into keyframe, show it as progressively as I could, right, until the shot was finalized. But the thing that I always found fun about reference was just to, more than anything, was just so that I could figure out what I was going to do in the shot. And then when it came to using the reference to figure out how, the thing that I enjoyed the most was just kind of looking through the reference and looking for, the 3, 4, or 5 poses that would really kind of tell the story and give the intent of the shot, or maybe the one golden pose that would do that. But I don't know if I ever found that. But just as reflected on what Larry was mentioning about, how far you use reference, and what Dave was saying about the trap of maybe kind of, going too much on your reference or not enough. I always found that was really useful, because you'll always find, just one or 2 poses that will really kind of make you want to go and animate the shot, basically, because you feel like, you captured the intent of what it is you're trying to sell. And I don't know, that I always just found that really nice, like with the stoic stuff, just going through and finding these poses where, all I was doing was kind of running down a little bank in the PDI car park, trying to, pretending to swing an axe and a shield. But when I stepped through the reference, there were these really kind of pushed and twisted poses that my own body was doing, like my legs would hyperextend, and like I'd anticipate a swing, and just the kind of things that I would never have thought of. And it was really fun for me to find those and to block those out first and show people those in steps.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I want to definitely kind of transition from reference, but I want to get David. You mentioned that you were at India working on Madagascar 3. Can you give us a little bit of kind of background on that, how that worked out for you? And
at the time I was already on Croods, and I wasn't a character lead at that time. I was just animator that just happened to do a lot of creature animation, because I kind of enjoyed it, and I think the results were pretty interesting there. And actually, the backstory of that, I think they had in mind that I could maybe go in India for being a supervisor on the Penguins of Madagascar, which was the first full-length production that they would do entirely in DreamWorks India over there. This is something that quite interested me. India is always a country that I really love the culture and a lot of things about it. And have the amazing opportunity to maybe be able to go there and supervise. So that was quite an interesting idea. So they just kind of, shipped me over there for 2 months just to have a taste of the country. And at the same time, the studio there was working on some sequence of Madagascar 3. So I just end up going there and, help them a little bit. That's when I worked for, I think it was 2 months. And I really landed in the middle of crunch time at the end. I think that was the last 2 months of production. So it was a bit brutal at first to, different country, different pipeline, different team, different style of animation, because, although Croods is not hyper realistic, when you go to a style like Madagascar, it's much more pose to pose and really cartoony. Maybe not as much as the first one, because, the style evolved within the franchise, but there was a lot to it was really different from the Croods. So I got there for 2 months, did some crazy hours with the rest of the team, but the people over there were so friendly and welcoming as well, and they were good to have an open mind for my inputs and everything. So it was just a great opportunity for me to go there. I ended up, for a personal reason, decide to not move to India for 2 or 3 years, and at the time, especially having very young kids, kind of play a little bit in the decision. But that kind of gave me a little bit the taste of a much more cartoony style, and at the same time, I saw a lot of people over there still shooting reference as well. So whatever the style, and comes back to what Cameron said, sometimes even if the end result of your animation might not look at all like a reference, it's still just a good way to come up with ideas. And then we're like, oh, that's actually a really good idea in my reference, but the character I'm going to animate as the proportion is nowhere near mine, and the timing is going to be completely different, and my posing is going to be different, and the staging is going to be different. But at least you have an idea of, oh, this timing was interesting and this little behavior there. So you were able to kind of incorporate some of those in there. So I would say overall it was an amazing opportunity to work over there. And it's actually when I came back after that I learned that Fred Nielsen had moved to another production, and I had the opportunity to move on with more creature stuff. And actually, maybe the fact that I was really comfortable and really happy on Croods, and that the opportunity to work on some crazy creatures and really fun stuff, maybe that played a little bit in the decision as well to not commit for another project, because on Croods it is most probably the best experience I had on a production, and the team. There was a really, really good vibe there that you don't find on all of production, and working with Chris Sanders and Jim Baxter as well. One of the best things they did is to really give the ownership of the work in the hands of the animators. And this is something that you're really, that really helps to be motivated and inspired as well. I've seen other production in other studio that, it was pretty much the director telling you, you're going to do exactly this, and this, and you were just going there and do this, and this. It was not like, this is your little sandbox. This is the world that you're working on. Now go in the wild and bring back, some crazy entertaining animation. This is most of the time what's gonna inspire you the most. So
that's funny, because both Jason and Mike in our previous podcast mentioned that this was probably by far one of their most favorite shows to have worked on because of the same reasons.
Yeah,
it's a similar thing, Larry, as well, for everyone that worked on Dragons with Chris and Dean, those guys, and Simon Otto, those guys are just so trusting of the animators, and just the sense of not ownership, it's not the right word, but just the sense of ownership over shots and stuff that the animators had was just it was really good. And unfortunately it's kind of a rare magic, but if you just listening to what Dave's been saying, I would have loved to have worked on Croods specifically, and it just sounds great.
And I think it really comes from the confidence that, obviously James Baxter being, a legend in animation, and Chris Sanders obviously has a very strong background as well. When people are confident in what they're doing, it seems that naturally they're going to give ownership to people around them, because they don't feel that anyone really is a threat in some way. So I don't know if it's closely related, but by experience, I've seen that a lot of time. It was. So and this is something, and I had the opportunity to work on with Jason and Mike Walling as well. And everybody, when you have this kind of very good vibe, it seems that anyone that's going to go throw a comments out there is going to be welcome. Whether the animator is going to do it or not, it always depends. But you're never afraid to give your input and try to make things better. So when you can land in this kind of environment, a very creative environment, it's great. And this is a little bit the opportunity that I have right now in video game as well. It seems that video game, even more than in feature, if you want to take responsibility and have the ownership of this and this, it's a much more organic process as well. So it gives a lot of space for artists that wants to say, this is what I can bring to the production. This is my inspiration. I'm gonna put it in there, whether it's character animation or creature animation or other stuff. But this is something I'm finding now with my new experience in gaming, and it's been great so far for that.
I actually want to transition now to gaming here, because I want to transition, be able to talk about that portion of it, but also kind of the evolution from what we're talking about in regards to reference now to motion capture. I know, Cameron, that you had mentioned that you're obviously using that now, and it's just kind of interesting. I wanted to get your guys' takes, both of you guys coming from a high-level feature film background to now working on something like video games where you're using motion capture. What's your guys' take on that? How have you enjoyed it and using it?
I think the thing that is great about it is you got to kind of take what you get from it, I guess. It's like you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it as this, this ultimate, I'm going to give you everything kind of free animation, and you can look at it as a medium in which to help you experiment with an idea. So for example, if you're doing some kind of short film or something like that, or prevising something, it's the perfect thing to quickly get content, inside a 3D camera and shoot different ideas and shoot different takes and figure out what you want to do for something before you spend, hours upon hours upon hours animating something. And obviously, I mean, it's not like this conversation hasn't happened before. There's some things that it's really good for, if you want super realistic human motion, then you are going to get that pretty much straight out of the box with mocap. But the thing that I find exciting about it is, coming back to what Richard Lico said in a previous podcast, it's this wonderful tool for, studying your own motion and things like that, but also just as, as a tool for quickly allowing you to experiment with ideas. I think that's the most, from my limited experience of it so far, that's the thing that I find the most exciting.
And I think the way that I've been trying to use it so far, and we're still trying to find some recipe with it. Like Cameron said, if you just take the data, the mocap data is going to look something super realistic, which can work from some production, but not for others. And it's based most probably from my experience from feature, but for now I'm using mocap a lot like I would use a reference. When I use a reference, I'm not going to copy, frame by frame. That's called rotoscoping, and that might be okay for some production, but not on the production that I had the opportunity to work on at DreamWorks. So a lot of time I would take the data, the mocap data that we have, and I would just say, okay, this is a key pose, this is a key pose, this is a key pose here and here and here, and I would kind of just get rid of all the extra data that I have in the middle. So it's pretty much like, instead of having a reference and say, okay, those are my gold pose, and then I'm going to reproduce them with the character, the CG character that I have. I already have those poses in there. I just have to find them and kind of clean all of the rest, so it's much more effective than doing just a keyframe. And then I would go on each of those poses and push them and make them a little more dynamic. And I'm going to tweak some of the timing in there, and then I'm going to layer on top of this new blocking that I have extracted from my mocap. So the end result is really interesting because you have something that is much more stylized than mocap, and at the same time you got that first blocking pass much more rapidly than full keyframe animation. And so there's different, obviously many different techniques. You can as well just layer on top of your mocap, and maybe you could get some of the similar result as well. And other thing as mocap for in terms of productivity, when you're thinking, obviously as a director now, I have to think at the entire team and make sure that everybody is kind of animating a little bit the same style and the same quality as well. So the mocap is going to give you some kind of a bottom quality. So junior animators at the very least will have this raw data that will look very realistic, and then great animators will be able to take that and bring it to the other level as well, something that doesn't really look like mocap anymore, that is much more dynamic, impactful, and visceral as a motion. So in terms of the tool, you can really take it. For me, it's just another tool. Depending, obviously, if you're working for something really realistic, you might take it right away and put it in your games or in your movie, but you can use it as a very powerful artistic tool as well.
Cameron, going from features to games, this is kind of a two-part question then. What do you enjoy most going from features to games? And then what do you miss in the games that you were able to do from features? So I guess pros and cons.
Yeah, I think you have to understand that even though you can be an animator on a feature film and you can be an animator on a video game production, you're really talking about two completely different things. What's very common is for people to compare the two things, and what people are looking at is the common strain of animation. And you can animate on a feature, you can animate for games, but your job on either of those things is so different. You could say they're completely different. What I loved about feature animation was it really gave me the chance to just sit inside and just completely indulge myself in what I really loved doing, which was animating. I could take a character and just completely go to town with the last little eyelash of detail. I'm not joking. You would animate eyelashes, right? And you would animate the size of pupils and stuff like that. But with games, it's not to say that those things aren't important if you had the ability to do that, but it's likely that you probably won't. It's more about the game and remembering that the people that are interacting with what you're creating, they're viewing it in a completely different format. They're not sitting in a theater suspending their disbelief and just basically letting it all hang loose for an hour and a half and not having to do anything. They're signing up for, they're committing to interacting with what you're doing and experiencing what you're doing in a way where, they don't necessarily want to see the same thing twice. They want to see your animation, but they want it to work differently in this scenario and differently in that scenario. And, they want your animation to convey to them what they did in the world, their choices, not the choices of the character in a movie. So the challenges are just, they're so different, they're kind of not worth comparing. But and game development is this amazing kind of hub of activity that Dave touched upon. There's just so many. From my experience, if you're a 3D artist or an animator or whatever your specialism, gaming is great for giving you the opportunity to just kind of interact a lot more directly with people from other parts of the production, like the engineers, the concept guys, the sound guys, the composers. Film is, just because it's been around for so long, all that stuff's become like crazy disciplined and super specialized. And that in itself is a great thing for creating that kind of thing. But for games, it seems to lend itself a lot more to this kind of bubbling pot of ideas, because, games are they're so young, they're so in their infancy. No one really knows how to make one properly yet. Everybody thinks they do, but I don't know if anybody really does. And they're constantly changing. It's a difficult thing.
No, it's interesting. It's basically trying to achieve the same thing, i.e., entertain the audience in this sense, but you're doing it in a completely different way because of the type of medium. And so I think
Exactly.
that's a great point.
Yeah, and the kind of things that you're trying to tell to the audience are completely different problems. You're not trying to necessarily convey a really clear subtext on what a character's thinking. You're trying to just convey really clearly, that this action will progress your movement, or this action will give you this reward. It's totally different, and one is not easier than the other. One is not more difficult, and one is not. They're just different things. Apples to oranges. It really is.
That's cool. What about you, David?
Yeah, just to come back to something that Cameron said, and for me it was kind of a surprise, because when you've been in the movie industry for that many years, you're used that everybody has more or less the same workflow, and you know exactly how everything is going to be produced. It's pretty much you start with the story, and then you record the voice, and you do the storyboards, and then we get the layout, and we animate it, and then we put this in the lighter's hands, and at some point you'll have a movie. It seems that a video game, it's much more organic. It's almost like everybody, so instead of it's really almost like everybody starts to run at the same time. You look around you and everybody is running and progressing, and we all know that in 3 years from now, when we're going to be done with the game, we all have to cross the finish line at the same time. Literally, sometime 2 weeks before the end, the game is broken, and it's just totally not working. And then the final 2 weeks. So it's kind of a different, and I think it really comes from this fact that if you're really committed and you want to have effect on other department than yours, this very organic process is going to allow some personalities to stand out more than others. And same thing as Cameron said, it seems that it's an industry that is still in its infancy, and I'm working with people that have more than 15 years of experience in gaming, and we're still trying to work on what would be the perfect workflow and pipeline for. And I'm sitting in meeting, and sometimes like, you guys did how many games before, and we're still trying to figure out this. But yeah, technology is progressing like crazy. There's new techniques. We have to adapt. There's a new generation of a console that arrives. You have to adapt to that. The marketplace is changing. There's a lot that goes to mobile now. Sometimes you don't just release one big game, but you might release them as a episodic game, so it's a different. So there's a lot of things that is still, and for me it was very refreshing to see that, wow, okay, we're in a very big industry, but it's an industry that is evolving. So there is some input that I can bring from features as well in there. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting experience so far for that.
It just depends on the kind of thing you want to do. If you really just love beyond anything, just the process and the thought and the creativity behind animation, then feature films is great for that. But if you want to be part of crafting more of an overall experience, and I suppose fairly you could say, being a lot more collaborative with artists and different kinds of people around you, and being part of something which is in its infancy and developing at such a crazy exciting rate, and actually figuring something out that maybe is completely new, then games it's great for that. It's really good.
Yeah, and there is some sense of discovery as you're going along as well, even with people that have a lot of experience in this field, and even just in terms of the different kind of character that you can animate. There's obviously a lot of creature that you can animate in games, a lot of animal, and so many different style as well. We tend to think that what are the big blockbuster? Well, you have the Assassin's Creed and you have the Battlefield and stuff. Those can be some pretty realistic and heavily rely on motion capture, but there are so many different kind of game that can have a lot of keyframe animation and crazy creatures and all of that. There's a sense of discovery that I didn't feel in features for a long time. I was kind of discovering right now in games as well. So it's really, really, it's really interesting for now.
Yeah. Cameron, is there anything that you can talk to us about on your game that you're working on, or not at this point?
Um, yeah, I don't want to be weird, Larry, but I can't, man. I
No,
kind
no,
of
I
can't.
got you. I
Yeah,
got you. That's why
yeah,
I
no,
asked.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks,
there's
man.
one thing that I learned in video game because I cannot talk about the game I'm working on either. There is a lot of secrecy in the video
Yeah,
game. Even just a few months, it seems sometime
yeah,
before the release. And this is something, I mean, I would bring friends at DreamWorks and I would show them the concept art for movies that's going to be released in 2018 or something like that.
yeah.
And then but I can't even mention what kind of game I'm doing, not even
Yeah,
mentioning any title or details. It's I yet have to know exactly why that is, why one industry is completely different to the other. But that's a reality that we have to
yeah.
deal with, and that's how it is.
Well, with that, we're actually just going to cut this podcast now. Then, no, just kidding.
That's where you're gonna scratch the record, and okay,
Yeah.
that's it.
No, that sounds cool, and I definitely understand that. That's why I was at least cautious in asking. But hey, you got to at least go out swinging, right?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, good try.
Anything you guys want to plug while we got you here wrapping this up? David, you want to tell us any more about the new workshop that Rick introduced us at the beginning of the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's so much we want to share with our students. Our first workshop actually ended up being really dense with information, and we wanted to give even more information and knowledge to the students. So we actually decided to split the first workshop into two different parts, which became Workshop 1 and Workshop 2. At the same time, we actually received increasing demand for more creature animation training. Realistic biped animation are often dealt with motion capture in the industry, but creature animation will always remain keyframe animation, right? And even if there's a lot of fun we can have with mocap when it's used in a clever and artistic way, full keyframe animation will remain what most animators actually aspire to work on. At the same time, we also partnership with amazing artists like Cedric Seo. By the way, you should check out his stuff online. Is just amazing. And he brought various aspiring new characters and creatures to iAnimate. We have Redback, which is a quadruped creature, Kriya, which seems to come straight out of hell or Resident Evil kind of game. And now we've just added Soul Collector, which honestly I don't really know what he actually is, but this guy actually has another creature hidden on his back, and he has huge dragon wings, and he's pretty awesome. So we've actually decided to integrate a great deal of creature animation training in those and assignment as well in this new workshop for the benefits of our students. And what me and Rick are really excited about is the special formula that we decided to go for with this workshop. So actually, for the first time at iAnimate, multiple instructor will present lecture and give reviews during one workshop.
Very neat.
Rick will teach the core of the workshop and focus on everything that is specific to game animation. And then we'll have special guest instructor, including myself, that will join in to give one or two class on very specific topics. On my part, I worked a lot on creatures, on the Croods, and I had the opportunity to be surrounded by so many great artists as well. So there's a lot of things I learned and I applied on that production, and this is all stuff that I really want to share with the student as well. Then, like I said, we would have other special guests that will lecture on specific topics as well. So, for instance, flying cycles, quadruped locomotion, animal anatomy, how to deal with exaggerated proportion, weight, and so on and on. All topics that I think that has very valuable knowledge that needs to be deserved to be shared as well. Maybe one last thing about I want to mention about this workshop. For those that would be only interested into the creature animation part of the workshop, and not that much into video game, like every workshop, you can enroll in this specific workshop, and there's no need to commit to the entire program, right? So you'll have a great creature animation training in there, and at the same time, you'll have a taste of the challenge of gaming animation. So, kind of a win-win situation that you kind of learn a little bit about something that you don't really know, and a lot about something that you really want to dig into. The new workshop is scheduled to start in September. And if you want any more information, you can go on our website, and everything will be described in there if you want more information. But other than that, I think honestly, the podcast, I'm really happy that I'm part of this one. I think that those podcasts are great, and I've been listening to all of them so far. And in each of those, there was little gold nuggets here and there that I definitely took and said, "Ooh, I have to remember this little thing that this guest just said, because that's actually really clever." So I just wanted to say, you guys, that you're doing an amazing job, and carry on.
Very cool. What about you, Cameron? You got a website that we can plug at all, or?
I've got a rotting dinosaur of a website. It's there. I might water it one day. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll put it in the show notes, and that way, if somebody in a year or so from now happens to stumble upon it, they can at least check it out.
Really quickly, Cameron's supposed to do something special for us at iAnimate Games, so I just want to remind him that I'll be coming for him. So that's how we roll with our team, you know. So
call you out on a podcast. It's public now. You can't back out.
That's how we roll with our buddies. You know, we're not nice with our buddies. You know, we're professional with some of our guests, but when it's our buddies, we just punch them out. So.
Yeah, I thought you've been pretty nice throughout this entire podcast. So I was waiting for the punch.
Yeah. No, it's because this podcast, there's so many amazing gold nuggets, as you would say. So I didn't want to get in between this great podcast.
All right. Well, definitely appreciate it. We'll have to get you guys on again. Maybe you guys can talk about your game. So cheers, and appreciate your time.
Great. Yeah, my pleasure, guys.